All right. Welcome, all of you. Thank you for coming to my first book signing. So I don't know what I'm doing with this because this is my first book. I've never had to sign a book before, but it's the first of my books, hopefully. One of the things I want to do, first of all, is talk about the painting that Laura had created. And then after I read where the theme came from, and then talk about the painting from my perspective and what I had asked Laura to do. Then I'm going to ask Laura to come up here and then talk about just her artwork here. And then she has a couple of art pieces out in the friendship room as well, so that maybe you have the need to commission her like I did with mine. And because this painting is so lovely that some of the girls in my family, their pictures have been moved to make room for the dragon's beast. But if you look at the book cover, this is the imagery. In Revelation chapter 12, it talks about a red dragon with 7 heads, and it's large enough to sweep a third of the stars out of the sky. The red dragon is the devil, and then the stars are the angels. And then it picks up in John's vision of Revelation 13 of seeing 2 beasts come out of the sea and the land. We're going to only focus on the first one. John says, I saw a beast rising out of the sea. He had 10 horns with 10 crowns on his horns and 7 heads with blasphemous names on his heads. The beast that I saw was like a leopard, and his feet were like those of a bear, and his mouth was like the mouth of a lion. The dragon gave the beast his power, his throne, and great authority. One of his heads seemed to have been fatally wounded, but his fatal wound was healed, and the whole world that followed the beast was amazed. They worshiped the dragon because he gave authority to the beast. They worshiped the beast, saying, who is like the beast, and who can go to war against him? The beast was also given a mouth that spoke arrogant and blasphemous things. He was given authority to do these things for 42 months. The beast opened his mouth to speak blasphemies against God, to blaspheme his name, his dwelling, and those who dwell in heaven. He was also given permission to wage war against the saints and to overcome them, as well as authority over every tribe and people and language and nation. All those who make their home on the earth will worship the beast, those whose names have not been written from the beginning of the world in the book of life, which belongs to the Lamb that was slain. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. If anyone is to be imprisoned, he is going to be imprisoned. If anyone is to be killed with a sword, he is going to be killed with a sword. Here, patient endurance and confidence are needed by the saints. And then John goes on to describe the beast out of the earth, which is the blasphemous church, the pagan church. So again, looking at the book cover or the painting here, I love what Laura did with the painting in that the beast is coming right at the reader. And so it's pictured then with lion's heads and a leopard's body and then bear claws and then 10 horns and then 10 crowns on the horns. And when Laura and I were collaborating on it, there's all kinds of artwork, not a lot, right, Laura, of artwork. There's not a lot. So we can kind of use our imaginations. And I just said, you know what, in all the artwork I looked at, I never saw any ram's horns on the beast. And so Laura painted on the main beast, ram's horns. Ram's horns in biblical imagery is power. And then where it talks about being fatally wounded on one side, so she painted it like this one side, it was dead. That's what the actual Greek says, not just wounded, but mortally wounded. So when I sign your pictures, I'll draw a little lion head with a scar on it. Okay. And then when I did that for someone today, he said, now I understand why you got a real artist. But it's coming out of the sea. And then we pictured that in the background is the Christian church with the Alpha and Omega up on the hill. But then you might wonder, well, what's this guy in the back? That's from Revelation chapter 10. When the 7 thunders had, verse 1 says, then I saw another powerful angel coming down out of heaven. He was clothed with a cloud with a rainbow over his head. His face was like the sun, his feet were like pillars of fire, and he had in his hand a little scroll, which had been opened. He put his right foot on the sea and his left on the land, and he cried out with a loud voice, just as a lion roars. And when he cried out, the seven thunders spoke using their own voices. When the seven thunders had spoken, I was about to write, but I heard a voice from heaven saying, seal up the things that the seven thunders said, and do not write them down. The angel whom I saw standing on the sea and on the land raised his right hand to heaven, and he swore by the one who lives forever and ever, who created the sky and the things in it, the earth and the things in it, and the sea and the things in it. He said, there will be no more delay. Instead, in the days of the sound made by the seventh angel, that is, when he is about to sound his trumpet, the mystery of God will also be completed, exactly as he made this good news known to his servants, the prophets. So this angel holding the scroll that no one else can open, that's Jesus Christ. And so it's interesting that you have this beast coming out of the sea, which is the persecuting governments of the world throughout history. And then you have the beast coming out of the land, which is the pagan church, which persecutes Christians. But 3 chapters before John sees that, he sees Jesus Christ standing with one foot on the land and one foot on the sea, saying symbolically, he's in control no matter what. He has the scroll of the end times that no one else can open, but Jesus can. And so that's the imagery in long form. There's a very short description in the inside cover of your book. So this time, we'll invite Laura to come up and then talk about the painting, the process, her work as a Shoreland art teacher, other artwork, and so forth. And then you can ask us questions specifically about the art.
All right. Hello, everybody. It's really exciting that I get to be here to talk to you guys too. So I'm from Minnesota. I went to Bethany Lutheran College, which is in Mankato, Minnesota. And there I got a degree in studio art and then art education. And I got a call 2 years ago to become the art teacher at Shoreland. That kind of what brought me around here. I've been able to do that. That's how I got connected with Pastor Zarling as well, through the different federations that Shoreland has with all their churches. That's how I became a member here. But I'm the art teacher at Shoreland, and we've been able to do a lot of really exciting things in the art program there and a lot of cool stuff for the future too. We're working on plans to get a nice altar painting that we can use at Shoreland in the chapel every day that we use. So that's kind of where we're headed in the future. So then last fall, or 2 falls ago, fall of 21, I believe, I got connected with Pastor Zarling, and he started talking about this book that he was going to write and how he wanted the beast to be on the cover and how cool that would be. So I got back and I started doing some research in the Revelations, and there's 2 different beasts in there. There's the beast of the sea, and there's also another beast, is a dragon with 7 heads. So actually, I don't know if you know this, I thought he was talking about the dragon with the 7 heads at first. So I started doing a bunch of sketches and planning of that one. And then as we talked more, we're like, oh, it's the beast of the sea. So again, I got to study a little bit more about that too. There's not too many really paintings if you do research. I think 2 common ones kind of popped up about how different artists kind of depict it. And it's hard for us to kind of comprehend all of Paul's writing in like this earthly state we're at with these 7 heads and these 10 horns and stuff like that. So it's hard for us to sometimes visualize it. So we together kind of talked a lot about it, came up with a bunch of different sketches, how we could kind of plan this out, how we wanted the horns too. The ram's horns was a cool way to make the main beast kind of the focal point of it, and then fitting 2 horns on some of them, 1 horns on some of them as well. Getting those bare feet, the leopard body, trying to make the anatomy make sense. How would an actual leopard have 7 heads, and how would that kind of work? So it was really cool working together. Then we got God's kingdom built on the rock over there, with Jesus being like the center of the light. So that light is reflecting on the building as well.
Yeah, and I love too how she painted it, and I didn't ask her to do this with the rainbow. We talked about the rainbow, but just the clouds and the dark water on the one side, and it just lighter over the Christian church. Yeah, I think that just displays that you don't have to worry when you're in the Christian church. Christ is in control.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about any of your other artwork?
Other artwork I do, my favorite thing is doing oil paintings, and I love doing oil portraits. I love it when my subject matter kind of makes eye contact with the viewer. It feels like you're kind of a part of it. So that was a really cool way of this one. The beast is coming right at you. It makes eye contact with you, which feels like you're a part of this. That beast is kind of coming for you. So oil painting is my favorite. I also do a lot of watercolors as well. And I do some sculpture, a little bit of sculpture. It's harder to do a lot of sculptures when you're not around it too much, but being with Shoreland, getting to teach them sculpture and do that stuff, it's given me more opportunities to work on sculptures, stuff like that too, with ceramics. But painting and drawing is my favorite medium, getting to work with those, with people and for people as well. So the paintings I have out there, one was just an architectural painting. I got really into architecture last year, so I was just painting a ton of architecture, which is just a lot of lines and stuff like that. And then after I kind of went through that phase, I'm like, why was I painting so many architecture paintings? So now I've gotten more into portrait painting again, and I get to work on a lot of portrait paintings with my students. So that gives me another opportunity to keep painting portraits and keep working on that kind of stuff. So, yeah.
Yes, you do say it represents the Alpha and Omega of the church.
Right.
Which, is there a distinguishing feature between the front and the back as far as Alpha and Omega, which is Alpha and which is Omega? Just curious.
The symbol is kind of just painted on the front there.
Right, yeah, so this Alpha and Omega, I shouldn't admit this, but I will, that I didn't notice it closely enough when we were putting the artist, when they put the title on. It wasn't until it was okayed by me that my daughter noticed, and so the one of the letters kind of covers up the Alpha and Omega and the cross, so that's on me. Yeah. But one of the things too, looking at it closely with the scar, is the eye, the left eye is kind of clouded over, like you might have with someone that, you know, has a dead eye. Just another little interesting touch you don't always see. Kind of like I pointed out yesterday, my LWMS devotion, the painting here of Jesus, you may not always notice it, that the artist there, Melanie, painted it so that the light is coming from the candle. There's a lamp underneath coming through his right hand. So it's the same kind of just a little imagery. Dave.
I was just wondering, what does the rainbow signify? Does it signify hope for the future?
I believe that's what he's talking about in seeing that rainbow in Revelation 10.
Yeah, it talks about the rainbow being over his head and kind of separating it from the storm that was next to it.
So
Or
instead
coming
of
around.
pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, it's Jesus. So
There you go. Yeah, instead of a pot of gold, the end is Jesus. Yeah, I like it. All right. Well, thank you. Well, thanks, Laura.
Yeah.
All right. So now, if you have any questions on the book itself. So I'll start with my own question. When I came back from preaching at the other campus day, one of our third graders was in the friendship room waiting for her brothers who were doing the robotics, and she asked, or her mom asked for her, she asked, "Why did you write a book?" So that's really good. And then before I could say anything, Mom said, "Well, because pastors had nothing else to do, so they decided to write a book." And I said, that was kind of it. Shelley knows I get kind of bored. Can't just bike all the time. You know, pastor stuff doesn't take up enough time, so let's write a book too. Anyone have any questions on anything in the book, why it was written, what it's about, and so forth? Nikki.
So is this like the first in a series? Is this a single thing? Are you, I mean, I assume you'll want to write again. So you're gonna kind of continue the similar themes like Revelation type stuff?
Yeah, that's a great question. So like last night, we had a couple of friends over and I was saying some things, like, for example, one of the things I had noticed yesterday while I was biking, that I just thought of this is the first chapter on submission. And I begin every chapter in the book with some kind of movie or TV reference. So one of my friends from Kentucky, where I had been his pastors, he read the first chapter and he put it on Facebook right away is, this is gonna be a great book. It starts with a Princess Bride quote. And then I said, it also ends with a Princess Bride quote. And so there's about 125 footnotes. Probably about 100 of those are geeky references to Star Wars, Star Trek, The Matrix, Princess Bride, and so forth. But the first chapter is on submitting to governing authorities, Romans 13, because you were here with me here in Racine and Water of Life, people saying with lockdowns, wearing masks, all that stuff, you just have to submit. Okay. And what I was thinking of yesterday while I was biking is that's what all the people only say, but then I might give defense. Well, the Bible also says an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But then someone say, well, but that's in the Old Testament. God tempers that with in the New Testament of love your enemies. Or I might say, well, James says that we're saved by works. Well, someone would say rightly, but Paul says we're saved by grace through faith in Jesus Christ, and they're right. And my argument then is, we as Lutherans, we use the catechetical method. We all went to catechism. You take a bunch of passages together to come up with a doctrine. And so I think it's very simplistic to say Romans 13 says submit, and then that's it. I think we need to use the rest of Scripture. And then one of my friends said last night, that sounds like a sequel for your book. But really, what I'm thinking of writing right now, and I'm reading, is C.S. Lewis, Chronicles of Narnia, and I working with Pastor Hagen, who hosts our podcast. He edited the book for me on doing consuming or creating in our current culture. And then what I would contribute to it is in light of the Chronicles of Narnia, because there's a lot of creating and a lot of consuming if you've read his books. So good question. Thank you. What else?
I don't know how to ask this
Yeah.
way, but I'll try. 50 or 75 years from now, the United States is in a communist rule. China will take over.
Okay.
Buying land all over. You'll have of our national debt to China. So anyway, when we're under communist rule, is your book gonna apply as far as not obeying the government?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I hadn't thought of. That makes me think of another geeky TV show that none of you have seen. So, but it's Firefly, where people still speak English, but they also speak Chinese because of that whole thing of the Chinese taking over. I think it applies in that what I really try and write about is maybe in America, where you are in a communist China now or in Russia, it might be different. I didn't really think of it too much that way, but in America, where we, the people, are actually above the government. And because I think when people say submit to the governing authorities, they think of, well, we submit to the mayor, we submit to the governor, we submit to the Congress and police and president. And yet it says we, the people, we are over all of those authorities. The authorities actually submit to us. And I think we've forgotten that. And so when you see every authority that I mentioned, they have to submit, especially to the Constitution. And so one of the things that when I go and talk to pastors groups, if they're not riled up enough about the book, this will get them even more riled up. It's that I wonder if the church, there were churches that remained open, even though their state and local governments forced them to close and then fine them for not closing. And yet every single one of those churches was vindicated by their state or federal Supreme Court. They said, you were right to remain open according to the First Amendment. So then what I would challenge our WELS pastors is, were the churches that remained open according to the First Amendment, or were they submitting to the proper governing authorities? And the churches that decided we need to close, were they submitting to an improper governing authority? Does that make sense? So I don't know, will get people riled up. That's why while I was writing the book, if you may have noticed for a while, my beard was getting kind of longer. On the sly, I was buying clerical collars. That way, if I ever got kicked out of the wells, I could go to the Missouri Synod. Yeah, and so I think to your question, Bill, is looking at these, looking at what's in the book and then trying to apply it. Because I do talk about like what was going on in China still in 2021, 2022 with COVID, and the people could not resist. They're actually locked in their buildings. The building would be on fire, but the Chinese officials were so afraid of COVID, they would lock the doors, put locks on them, and the people would burn to death. That's not right. No way. And so I've got it several times in the book that I quote myself saying, we need a little courage now, or we're going to need a lot of courage later. So you see people in other countries like France right now is a kind of open rebellion over raising of the retirement age. Okay. And it's not good. Okay. What could have happened to prevent that from happening is resistance little by little, like what's going on with Dutch farmers. I don't know if you've paid attention to that. We usually don't get these things. But the Dutch farmers, the Dutch government is taking their land away from them, shutting them down because of cow farts and stuff like that. Okay. They're saying we need to protect ourselves from global warming or climate change. And to do that, you can't have these cows and so forth. Well, so the farmers realize they're going to shut down our farms. That's our livelihood. That's our kids' livelihood. That's our inheritance we're passing on to our kids. So what are the farmers doing is they're taking their tractors and they're blocking traffic, miles and miles of traffic. They're going and they're setting hay bales on fire along the interstate. They're taking their manure spreaders and taking them to like the city hall and then emptying them there. Okay, it's not pleasant, but what is it trying to do is saying we need to resist. And we may not agree, but we with any of those things, or maybe we do, but the key is they're trying to stop the government from taking what doesn't belong to them. So a little bit of resistance to protect what belongs to us and what God has given to us. And what I say in the book is that's the 7th, 9th, and 10th commandments.
But on the other hand, there's a lot of research on right now in terms of what you feed the cows and supplements and that type of thing. I grew up on a dairy farm. I was a dairy farm until I was 23 before I went to college. And so I still get a paper called The Horse Dairy. It's about 40-page magazine, stuff like that. And there's a lot of research going on to reduce the methane emissions. And it's only like 1% of the total methane emissions in this country come from the dairy farm.
Yep.
And so they're working on the wrong problems.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I was listening to a podcast last month where a big farm, I think it's down in Indiana, they were working on those things. And the farmer said, it's really not the cow farts, it's the cow burps.
Yeah.
But it's the methane either way, but they are totally in their huge farm carbon neutral because they use everything. They use all of that methane and they fuel their trucks, they fuel their tractors. But those are the things that our governments aren't doing, the smart things. They put their emphasis elsewhere. And so that's where I posit in the book is maybe we need to resist and say, all right, maybe this isn't working. We need to say no so that we can get them to say over here, let's look over here. Okay. Yeah. Right. Right. So you're talking about Nazi Germany. So just laying out some of the chapters. So Romans 13 is what I kind of talked about and I start with the Princess Bride quote of, I don't think that word means what you think it means when Bazzini says inconceivable. And so what I posit is maybe the word submit doesn't mean what we think it means. And I think a lot of people were saying submit to the government, meaning obey. So what I do is I'm trying to just do a lot of logic. And one of my classmates, when I was writing the book, he said, I didn't think that you were this kind of a deep thinker. And I'm not a deep thinker, but I think this is, you guys know me from enough Bible studies and sermons, like to use illustrations. And so, and comparisons. And what I did is compared, where it says submit to the governing authorities to, it also says that you have to submit to me as your spiritual leader. That wives are to submit to their husbands, children are to submit to their parents, slaves are to submit to their masters, or we might say today, your employees to your employers. But I make the case that if an employer is abusive to the employee, that employee needs to get out and call the police. If a parent is abusive to in the relationship with a child, or a husband to the wife, they have to get out. And we would counsel that. If the pastor is abusive, you either leave the church and you get the authorities. And yet we would, as pastors, say that every single time. But for some reason, when it comes to submitting to government, we say, you got to suck it up. And it has to be cohesive. And I don't think it is. That's one of the things I posit with that. Yeah.
Can you talk about it about how we got to where we are today? Because a lot of what you're talking about is where we were at the time of the Revolutionary War. Same thing, we had injustice from Great Britain, and they decided, when they wrote the Declaration of Independence and everything, that they were just in doing and not submitting because of the things that Great Britain was doing to the colonies.
I did not. That's a great follow-up book. But I would encourage you, to talk about the American Revolution and so forth. So I have read a number of books from our own WELS pastors and professors on civil government and so forth. And they often say that our American government was wrong by not submitting to the British government. And so I would encourage you, if you're interested, is to listen to podcasts or read books or articles by Professor Ryan McPherson. Laura and Isaiah had him at Bethany College. So he talks a lot about that, of saying, and I haven't done a lot of research on it, but he talks about how the government, the British government and so forth, with the representatives here in the American colonies, that did give them the legal right to resist. But, if we should, maybe we should have called it the American resistance instead of American Revolution. And then going back to like what Jay says, just his question on Nazi Germany. So Revelation 13, the second chapter the first chapter is about the governing authorities serving as God's servant. But in Revelation 13, it's the governing authorities now act as Satan's servant. So somewhere in between there. Then there's the third chapter was written. I actually had one of our WELS call workers get very red-faced because I was resisting things, and he said, "You're not Lutheran." Said it right to me, right to my face. "You're not Lutheran." Well, I didn't know this at the time. I'm very Lutheran. Well, I knew that, but I didn't know that the basis for the third chapter is Luther's warning. Is he wrote a warning letter to my dear German people on the doctrine of resistance, because he saw what was coming. Like Bill said, you can see what's coming with China. He saw what was coming with the emperor. And so he was wondering, could we resist? And so he was resistant to resistance because he had spoken so strongly and harshly against the peasants revolting against the knights, but yet he saw legally and scripturally. So that's the third chapter. The fourth chapter is the Magdeburg Confession, which lays out our Lutheran doctrine of resistance. Then the fifth chapter on resistance I lay out scriptural examples of resistance, historical examples of resistance, and even Christian resistance, even within our Lutheran church body from 100 years ago. So to Jay's point, one of my favorite examples is from Nazi Germany. It's where toward the end of the war, World War II, that the Nazis had gotten all of the Jews, except for the Jewish men that were married to German purebred wives. So they finally arrested those men. And so the women, the German women, what they did is they went and protested on Rosestrasse, the Rose Street, where the men were held. And they just stood there. They probably sang hymns, whatever, prayed. Even with the Gestapo guns pointed at them, they stayed and resisted and gathered more and more people. And then the Nazis backed down because they were afraid that the public outside of Germany was going to hear about this and find out what was really going on inside of Germany. But more than that, they were worried that it would cause a resistance among all of the Germans and overthrow the Gestapo and the Nazis. And so within a couple of days, every one of the Jewish men were released. Why? Because of a few German ladies, 6,000 German ladies. So what I point out in the book is that two things. To Jay's point is that there were multiple assassination attempts on Hitler's life, and none of them worked. And yet a bunch of women made him back down. And then the second thing is to Jay's point is, what if the rest of the Germans would have resisted in the very beginning, had a little courage? Maybe none of those atrocities would have happened.
Yeah, but it is, sometimes it's probably harder, even though you only have to have a little resistance. It's harder to gather enough people to have an effect, because you don't have enough people who feel like you do. Like right now, 64% of the people in the United States support abortion, according to all the statistics and all the surveys. That should be enough that the other 36% should be up in arms about abortion, and yet you can't get enough people to speak up against it.
Yeah.
Because abortion is murder.
Right. Yeah. And so that's for us as Christians. And the example I used with my catechism students the other day of standing up, I talked about, I'm not a hockey fan, but I do read. And there's a Russian hockey player, NHL player, several months ago that was taken to task because he refused to wear the gay pride NHL, his team jersey. And, people are saying, go back to Russia and all these kind of things where there's war. Okay. And then a couple of weeks ago, a second NHL player said, I'm not going to do this. And then there were two NHL teams that said, we're not going to do this. And now NHL looks like they're just going to forget about the whole gay pride thing at all. Because one guy stood up, and then another guy, and then a bunch of other guys. So that's the key, is to stand. It is really hard to stand apart. You think of the three men, of the fiery furnace, or three men with thousands of people. But once you stand up, and you always have to stand up for what's right, and then hopefully others will stand with you.
It's a similar thing like Anheuser-Busch.
Yeah.
With the transgender.
Yeah, Anheuser-Busch, yeah.
Kid Rock, his eloquent speech, he started it, and then, little by little, and now it's.
Right. Right. Yeah. Caleb.
Yeah, so I'm wondering, and this is something I say from the perspective of Christians in Russia, if your government is breaking international law, with the use of hyperbaric weapons in Ukraine, and mass murder civilians, among quite a few other international crimes, at that point, what steps can you take to resist, and how far can you go with resistance? I know there's been attacks on Putin's life. Is that something that in the right and the wrong, if he's breaking international law, then
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I think I just heard a podcast on that too, more with Hitler, and they were talking about governing authorities, trying to take Hitler out. And so that's one thing if it's a governing authority versus a civil, a citizen and so forth. Yeah, those are all very difficult things. And that's really the purpose of the book. I talk about in the introduction that the reason I wrote the book isn't because I set out to, I'm nothing else to do. Let's write a book. I was tasked with writing a paper for pastors conference that was called Tyranny and the Christian Life, Ministry, and Christian Witness in the Left-Hand Kingdom. Okay, because it's pastor, so it's long and boring. But the reason I was tasked with this and not someone else is because the other brothers in the Shoreland Federation noticed the way we did things here was a lot more open than the other churches were in the area. We didn't enforce masks. If you wanted to wear a mask, you wore a mask. If you didn't want to wear a mask, you didn't wear a mask. We passed the offering plates around. We had common cup during communion. I quote one of our members in yours, because he had put on Facebook, this is how gangsta my church is. We have common cup during COVID. Okay, so that was very different from other people. We had just redone the friendship room in February, and then March was shut down. And then, I don't know, March, April, May, maybe May, we were back. July. Okay, one of the best things was we had, and maybe it was Bill Temke's funeral. It was a big funeral. We had to take the tape down. Remember the tape? We had to take the tape down, and then it never went back up. We lost the tape rolls. But no one ever said anything, at least not to me. But that was different. What we were doing wasn't really any different than other Wisconsin churches were doing north of here, west of here, where it's more free. But here it seemed different. And so that's why I was tasked to write a paper. And the more I read, the more I listened to podcasts, the more I read scripture and thought about these things. And I just kept writing and ended up being 13 chapters. I ended up cutting 100 pages, 2 chapters out to make it more affordable, more readable. But that's how that book was written, just to figure out how do we apply these things. That's a long answer to your question, Caleb, is because people, this, no one was discussing these things, right? Everyone had their lines, even pastors, even churches. This is what we're doing, or I'm not doing this. And there was no discussion in the middle. And so my whole point in this is I may be wrong. I don't think I am, that's why I wrote it, but I could be. But the key is at least let's discuss these things. One of the things too that I thought of, these are all really good thoughts I had after I wrote the book, but this is what I write to Wells pastors, now that I'm not afraid to get kicked out of the synod, is we're blessed in our Wisconsin to be very united on doctrines, right? We're one when it comes to baptism and Lord's Supper and justification and sanctification, roles of men and women and fellowship, even worship. Worship styles may be a little different, but we're united. Were we united when it came to how to handle governing authorities? Not at all. And so that's one of my big selling points to pastors or people buying the book as a gift to their pastors is we need to be talking about these things, because the next time this happens, and there will be a next time, it may not be a disease, it'll be something else. I said that we need to be united.
If you don't mind sharing, it's writing this book, if you've got more positive or negative feedback.
I think positive, because I only like listen to positive. That's why if you want to know how sinful we are, just read comments on Facebook or YouTube or anything. But when I gave the first 5 chapters of the book for my paper assignment to our pastors conference, it felt like it was me and maybe one or two other, maybe me and one other pastor that agreed with what I written, and then 17 others that disagreed. Because the very first comment I had after I was finished going through very quickly the 5 chapters, a pastor said, "I think you're confusing the 2 kingdoms." That was the opening salvo. I didn't have a very good answer then, but his comments in the book. And my answer is, I get kind of a shot. It's maybe maybe I am confusing the two kingdoms. And what I talked about the two kingdoms is the left-hand kingdom of the earth, and then the right-hand kingdom of the spiritual kingdom. Okay. And I think what this pastor was saying is you're trying to bring about Christ's kingdom here on earth by governing authorities and so forth. And that's not my point at all. What I challenge in the book is perhaps the churches that close their churches and allowing the left-hand kingdom to close the right-hand kingdom, they're the ones that are confusing the kingdoms. So that one might get a little fire, but that's on purpose because I want us to be talking about these things.
Well, that's because a couple of pastors in California went to jail, right?
Yeah, especially in Canada. Canada's, yeah. Thank you.
So the answer cannot be whole book, just gonna put this out there.
Okay.
What is your favorite chapter or maybe
Oh.
a couple of chapters that you enjoyed writing the most?
Well, if you were here for Easter Sunday, you heard a couple of pages from my chapter on fear. Okay. Or I encourage you to follow Resisting the Dragon's Beast on Facebook. So you'll get pretty much the whole chapter, a couple paragraphs at a time for the month of April. Because what I challenge there with fear is, people would say, do not test the Lord. Jesus says, don't put your Lord, your God to test to the devil's temptations. And yet I posit in here, God says, test me in this, says the Lord God Almighty. There's sometimes he says, don't test me. And other times he says, test me. So maybe like with COVID and, with whether it's separation, 6 feet or a mask or a vaccine and so forth, people would say, don't put the Lord to the test, just do all of those things for your safety. And what I say is, well, maybe God has given us healthy bodies that can handle these things. Maybe we're not trusting and testing in the Lord enough by giving into all those things. So that's a chapter on fear, but probably my favorite one is the last two, freedom and never give up. There was a very, very long, but I think very fair review that I just found the other day on Twitter. I don't follow anyone on Twitter, and I have 2 people that follow me on Twitter, but someone shared it. And so I put it on Facebook, so you can read it on Resisting the Dragon's Beast. It's a long, but I think it's a very fair review. Whoever the author is said, he liked the first half of the book, but the second half seems different. And I think that's fair. It is, because I talked about spiritual warfare, Christian quietism, the gift of reason. That's the longest one. That's about everything that happened with COVID, like masks. And I show from data, they didn't work. Or the 6 feet, that it was all made up. It was supposed to be over 10 feet, but no one knows how long 10 feet is. So they made it 6 feet. They said putting up the plastic barriers, except that actually traps air in and makes it worse to breathe. All of these kinds of things. And it's all well documented. Even Dr. Brugge said that in his review of the book. So the gift of reason, fear, and then the last two on freedom and never give up. With the freedom one, and there I use the quote, freedom from Braveheart. In that God has given us a wonderful blessing in our nation of America of having freedom. And I think so many people, even pastors, are saying, oh, just give it up, allow the government to take whatever. But if God has given us a house, if he's giving us income, a car, whatever it is, that's ours. It doesn't belong to anyone else. And according to the 7th, 9th, and 10th commandments, we're called to protect that. And we're called to protect what belongs to other people, whether it's our neighbors or our children. And so we can't just willy-nilly give it up, because then we're like Esau giving up his inheritance for a bowl of lentil soup. Okay. So God gives us freedom. We should protect that freedom, because we don't want our kids ever to come back and say, Dad, Mom, what was freedom? Because they don't know, because we didn't protect it to give it to them.
Well, that's one of the biggest problems with their country right now, is the lack of respect for other people and their property and their rights.
Yeah. Any other questions you have? Shelley, you got any questions? No. So you may have heard this before. So for two things, I'll bring Shelley into this, is on Sunday, April 2nd, when my book became public to be published and sent out on Amazon, my publisher said, watch for it because you may be the top author. And so I did. At 7 o'clock when I finished memorizing my sermon, getting ready for church, I went on Amazon on my phone and I was the #1 author in the spiritual book section. And I messaged my author, Anthony Horvath, right away, and because I screenshotted it and sent, and then he sent back an hour later. Well, I'm glad you got the screenshot because you're not the top author anymore. But so I came back to the bedroom and I told Shelley, you are married to the #1 new author in Amazon. And you know what she did? Nothing. Yeah, it didn't change. Yeah. And then like a couple of weeks later, then I asked my publisher, well, how many books have I sold? And he said, well, right now it looks like 250. And I told that to Shelley. She said, don't take this the wrong way, but that's about 200 more than I thought you'd said. Yeah. Way to keep me humble. Yeah. Anything else you want to know about the book? I appreciate all of you being here. This is awesome. Yeah. It is.
So there's a lot of discussion around Jesus, was he a Republican or was he a Democrat? Did you bring anything into the book about what you would have expected his behavior to be in any of this?
No, so she asked if Jesus was a Republican or Democrat, what his reaction to any of this would be. I think the only time I mention, like what would Jesus do during this is when I heard people, and you probably did too with COVID, people were going in the middle of the mass or the mask hysteria. People said, well, Jesus would wear a mask or Jesus would keep 6 feet apart. And I think I talked about that in the book. If not, here it is. And I said, Jesus was the Son of God. He didn't have to wear a mask. He didn't have to worry about giving germs to anyone or getting germs from anyone else. And he definitely would not have kept 6 feet apart when the government told him to, because his own government and religious laws told him to never touch lepers. And he did that all the time. So those are little, I didn't put that in with the doctrine of resistance, but those are little things too. Like I even use Jesus as an example several times of resistance. You think, how would Jesus resist? And I said, like when his mom tells him to go make wine or do something for the wedding party, he says woman, which is pretty shocking. As a woman, this is not my time. I'm about my Father's business. You don't tell me what to do. My Father does. But he's respectful, but he resists. Or when he's before the religious leaders, the Sanhedrin, and they say, tell us who you are. He doesn't say anything. He resists them. Or when he's before King Herod, again, his king, and he really says, perform for me like a clown. And he doesn't. So there's little resistance things too. And one of the big points I try and make is we may not always agree with other people, especially if we see someone resisting and we don't think they should be. We should always give them the benefit of the doubt. That's the 8th commandment. Take their words and actions in the kindest possible way, especially if they're a Christian, because yes, they're sinners, but they are also children of God. They're brothers and sisters of Christ. And so we trust their motivation. Their motivation may be different than ours, but it's sanctified motivation like ours is to do something or not do something. We trust them. And I don't think we had that in the last couple of years of sanctified trust. Rachel, do you have any questions? You read the book. You didn't come with any questions. Okay, I would just put you on the spot, just like you would do with your class.
Yeah.
All right. So one last thing is I had a couple of people that asked for the book to be an audio book. And one of my classmates actually said that. I know he was just being smart. He said, And I told him that I was going to get Liam Neeson to read it. And he said, "Was Morgan Freeman busy?" Yeah, so I told him, Morgan Freeman is already signed to do the documentary. And Daniel Radcliffe is signed to play me. So there's the humility again, Shelley. Yeah. But I am working on, it'll be slow to put this out, that I am working to record it myself as an audio book. And then as I'm doing that, I'm also taking notes so that I can put together a study guide so that we here or other churches and pastors or people on their own can use it for small group Bible studies, book clubs, a bigger, larger study and so forth, just to be able to, again, do what we're doing here, just kind of looking at scripture and civics. So I think that civics is, I mean, we're not, Shelley brings this up all the time. We're not taught civics anymore. We're taught social studies. Just totally different.
Right.
Someone, one of our members recently said to me on Facebook, she read the first 4 chapters. "Pastor, you are super smart when it comes to government." I said, "I'm not super smart, just really smart." But I told her I learned everything I needed to know about the government from, I'm Just a Bill and the 3-Ring Circus. You know what that's from, right? Schoolhouse Rock. But we they don't even play Schoolhouse Rock, so people don't know these things. Oh, all right, thank you, Rachel. But the key is, if people, because pastors challenged me too on this, why are you, a pastor, writing this about government stuff? Because I'm a Christian citizen. This is our vocation as Christian citizens. We can't give that up. And if we allow, a big thing I point out in the 2nd chapter on with a dragon's beast is, if we as Christians don't resist and we expect unbelievers to do it, they won't. Because the unbelievers are worshiping the beast. And so if we go along with them, it's just going to get worse and worse, as opposed to we stand up little by little. And a big thing too is that, you learn this in catechism class. I teach this in catechism class, the 3 uses of the law, right? Curb, mirror, guide. The law curbs us. So every time we see a police officer when we're driving, what do? We slow down. It's a curb. Okay. It keeps us from doing the things we're not supposed to do. So one of the things I learned as I was writing the book is, we are the curb to the government. The government curbs our sinful nature. Well, the government is made up of a lot of people with sinful natures. We say no so that they hopefully come back away from being Satan's servant and work as God's servant again. All right. Well, thank you. All right, and then we'll go out into the French room. Thank you, ladies, that brought some refreshments, and then I'll sign books, and then Laura is going to, you can talk to Laura about her artwork and so forth. Thank you.